October 14th, Crestwood Bluffs, Colorado, United States. Let me describe a sound for you. Not a scream. Not a gasp. A laugh. Picture a courtroom, all polished wood and heavy silence. The air is thick, stale, like everyone has been holding their breath for weeks. A 16-year-old boy named Leo Reed sits at the defense table. He looks like the kid every parent dreams of, clean-cut, intelligent, wearing a sweater that screams honor student. The prosecutor, a woman with tired eyes, holds up a photograph for the jury. It's a picture of the victim, Marcus Thorne, smiling on a hiking trail, alive. And Leo laughs. It's not a nervous giggle. It's a sudden, sharp, genuine burst of sound. It's the kind of laugh you'd let out at a ridiculous joke with your friends. It echoes in that silent room, and for a full 3 seconds, nobody moves. The judge freezes. The jurors' eyes widen. Leo's own mother, in the front row, presses her knuckles to her mouth as if to physically shove a sob back down. And then, right beside her, you see Leo's father, David, a forensic toxicologist. A man who has spent his life in labs looking for poisons so small you need a microscope to see them. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't look away. He just stares straight ahead, his face a mask of something worse than grief. It's a hollow, terrible understanding. That laugh. That's where our story begins. Or rather, that's where it ends. To understand how a sound like that could happen in a place like that, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the beginning, to a place where everything was perfect. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. 6 months before that laugh. Crestwood Bluffs in spring. You have to see it to believe it. Imagine a community where every lawn is a perfect green carpet, every SUV is spotless, and the biggest problem most people have is whether the homeowners association will approve their new patio color. This was the Reed family's world. David, the respected scientist. Evelyn, the powerhouse attorney. And their son, Leo, their masterpiece. At 16, Leo wasn't just smart. He was intellectually untouchable. National Merit Scholar. State chess champion. He had a smile that was polite, confident, and just a little bit cold if you looked a second too long. He moved through life like he was following a blueprint he'd already written, and the rest of us were just background characters. And then there was Marcus Thorne. The boy next door, literally. 17 years old, a walking burst of energy where Leo was a calculated whisper. Marcus wasn't a genius by Crestwood Bluff standards. He wasn't destined for an Ivy League robotics team. He was an artist. He'd be out by the community lake, sketching the trees, his laughter carrying further than his conversations. People were drawn to him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. Leo watched him. From his bedroom window, from a bench at the park. He'd watch Marcus effortlessly make friends, joke with teachers, live in a way that seemed so unearned. To Leo, life was a complex equation you solved for maximum reward. Marcus lived like it was a song he was humming. And that hum, that easy joy, it didn't compute. It felt, to Leo, like an error in the system. The first crack in the perfect picture, the one nobody saw, happened on a Tuesday night at the Reed family dinner table. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and accomplishment. David was talking shop, decompressing from his day. "It's the ones you can't see that haunt you," he said, swirling his water glass. "We got a case back today, a cardiac arrest in a healthy 20-year-old. Nothing in the blood work. Nothing in the tox screen. Clean. It's like a ghost did it." Leo, who had been quietly cutting his food with surgical precision, looked up. His eyes were bright, interested. Not in a morbid way, but in the way a programmer looks at a tricky line of code. "If there was nothing in the tests," Leo asked, his voice calm, curious, "how would you even know to look for poison? I mean, theoretically." David smiled, the proud professor. Well, sometimes the absence of evidence is the evidence. You'd look for an entry point. Something that bypassed the usual channels. a substance that metabolizes into nothingness inside the body, leaving only a faint, strange chemical shadow behind. A ghost in the machine. Leo nodded slowly, taking a sip of water. A ghost in the machine, he repeated, as if savoring the phrase. So, it could be done. If someone knew what they were doing. In theory, sure, David said, shrugging. But you'd need a deep, specialized knowledge. And a complete lack of humanity. He laughed then, a warm, fatherly sound. Good thing we're just talking hypothetically over dinner, right? Right, Leo said, returning his father's smile. Hypothetically. Across the table, Evelyn beamed at her two brilliant men. But David, for just a fraction of a second after his son looked back down at his plate, felt the smallest, coldest prick of something. It was gone as fast as it came. He dismissed it. That was his son. His brilliant, perfect son. He had no idea that the blueprint for a murder had just been finalized in that young, brilliant mind. That the hunt for a ghost had just begun. And that the first fragile thread of the tragedy that would end with a laugh in a courtroom had just been spun, right there at his own dinner table. Think of the most careful person you know. The planner. The one who reads the manual cover to cover before assembling the furniture. Now imagine that mind, that intense focus, turning toward a single dark purpose. That's what happened to Leo Reed in the weeks after that dinner conversation. It started in his father's home office. A room that smelled like old paper, leather, and faintly, of chemicals, a scent David Reed brought home from his lab. For Leo, it wasn't just a room, it was a library of secrets. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held dense textbooks with titles like Principles of Forensic Toxicology and Advanced Metabolic Pathways. To anyone else, it was a snooze. To Leo, it was a toolbox. He waited for the house to be empty. Then, he'd sit in his father's worn leather chair, pull a heavy volume off the shelf, and begin his research. He wasn't reading for school. He was conducting a feasibility study. His phone was beside him, but he wasn't scrolling social media. He was on incognito browser tabs, diving into medical forums and obscure botanical databases, his searches clinical, precise. Cardiac glycosides. Undetectable metabolites. Rapid tissue absorption. He was looking for the ghost his father mentioned. And he found it. Or rather, he found her. A plant called Convallaria kaiskai, lily of the valley. Pretty. Delicate. Common in ornamental gardens. And packed with a compound so vicious it could scramble the heart's electrical signals until it just stopped. Best part? It broke down into natural, body-friendly chemicals within hours. By the time anyone thought to look, the ghost was gone. A perfect, invisible thread. But a genius doesn't trust his mind alone. He needs a record. Leo took a simple, black composition notebook. He hid it inside the hollowed-out pages of a thick book on chess grandmaster strategies, a fitting cover, he thought. In neat, meticulous handwriting, he began his ledger. At the top of the first page, he didn't write, "Plan to kill Marcus." That was crude. He wrote, "Project, empirical proof." Below that, he made 2 columns. Subject, MT. Hypothesis, superior systemic stress, emotional, psychological, induces catastrophic failure in a structurally sound but conventionally prioritized system. He was writing a lab report. Marcus Thorne was just the subject. The system to be tested. Now he needed the sample. This part was almost too easy. The Crestwood Bluffs Botanical Garden had a whole bed of lily of the valley near the koi pond. One Saturday afternoon, Leo took his biology field kit, a totally normal thing for a student like him to carry, and under the guise of collecting leaf samples for a photosynthesis study, he clipped several stems, sealed them in a plastic bag, and slipped them into his backpack. He saw Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down walking her poodle. She waved. "Getting a head start on your science project, Leo? So diligent." He gave her that polite, honor student smile. "Just trying to be thorough, Mrs. Gable." Thorough. That was the word for it. Back in the silence of his bathroom, the fan humming, he began the extraction. He used a makeshift setup, a mortar and pestle from a culinary kit he'd never used for cooking, solvent from model airplane glue, filters made from coffee liners. He wasn't a mad scientist in a movie lab. He was a careful student following a recipe he'd reverse-engineered from academic papers. The process was slow, tedious. It required patience. And as he worked, grinding the delicate white flowers into a pulp, a profound arrogance settled over him. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't panic. It was a cool, deep satisfaction. He looked at the faint, sticky residue he was carefully scraping into a tiny glass vial. No one knows this is here, he thought. My father spends his life looking for poisons, and the perfect one is being made in his own house. He'll never see it. None of them will. He labeled the vial with a simple code only he would understand: CK Isolate Control Solution. He placed it in a box of old chess pieces in his closet. The ledger went back into the chess manual on his shelf, between chapters on the King's Gambit and Endgame Theory. He stood in the middle of his perfectly clean room. The invisible thread was spun. The hook was fashioned. All that was left was to choose the moment to cast the line. And in that moment, Leo Reed felt more than smart. He felt sovereign. He was the only person in his world who understood how fragile the whole system really was. And that knowledge, that secret, made him feel utterly, completely untouchable. Have you ever disliked someone so much that their very happiness felt like a personal insult? That every laugh of theirs grated on you, and every success of theirs seemed to highlight some failure of your own? For Leo Reed, this wasn't a passing mood. It was a data point. An anomaly in the world's logic that needed to be corrected. Marcus Thorne's biggest moment was approaching: the senior portfolio review for the Art Institute scholarship. His entire future hinged on a digital slideshow of his paintings and sketches. He'd been working on it for months, and the whole school knew it. The art teacher, Ms. Green, had called his portfolio breathtaking. Leo found this publicly celebrated passion embarrassing. It was so messy. So emotional. But it was also the key to everything Marcus wanted. So, in Leo's mind, it became the perfect test subject. The school's computer lab was busy the day before the review. Marcus was there, putting final touches on his presentation file on one of the public desktops. He got up to get feedback from Ms. Green at her desk, just 15 feet away. That was all the window Leo needed. He'd been pretending to work at a computer nearby. As soon as Marcus turned his back, Leo stood up, casually walked over, and slid into Marcus's chair. His fingers flew over the keyboard. In under 30 seconds, he'd located the main portfolio file, titled mt_final_v3.ppt, and replaced it with a file of the same name from a USB drive in his pocket. This one contained nothing but corrupted data. A digital black hole. He then emptied the computer's recycling bin, stood up, and walked back to his seat, just as Marcus was turning around. The whole act took less than a minute. A clean, surgical strike. The next day, in the packed auditorium, was the catastrophe. Marcus stood at the podium, flushed with nervous pride. He clicked to open his presentation. The screen went black. Then an error message flashed up in stark white letters. File corrupted or cannot be found. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Marcus's smile froze, then melted into panic. He clicked frantically. "It was here," he stammered, his voice cracking over the microphone. "I saved it right here." He had no backup. The scholarship committee, looking sympathetic but deeply unimpressed, shuffled their papers. The opportunity evaporated right in front of him. The air was sucked out of the room, replaced by a thick, awkward pity. From the back of the auditorium, Leo watched. He didn't smile. He just observed, his head tilted slightly, like a scientist watching a predicted chemical reaction occur. Catastrophic systemic failure. The confrontation came after school, near the bike racks. Marcus's eyes were red-rimmed, his hands clenched into fists. He'd asked around. He'd heard Leo was in the lab. "You did something," Marcus said, his voice low and shaking. "You messed with that file." Leo looked genuinely perplexed, a masterpiece of innocent confusion. "Marcus, I'm really sorry about what happened. That's horrible. But why would I even touch your art project? I was working on my AP Physics simulation. We don't exactly run in the same circles. It was the dismissal in his tone, the cool, clean distance of different circles, that broke Marcus's control. You've always hated me. You think you're better than everyone. Leo sighed, as if dealing with a tiresome child. I think you're upset, and you're looking for someone to blame. I get it. But maybe the lesson is to always have a backup. He shouldered his backpack, the model of reason. I hope you figure it out. He walked away, leaving Marcus vibrating with raw, inarticulate fury. The victory was complete. Not just in the act, but in the reaction. Marcus had proven himself to be everything Leo thought he was, emotionally volatile, unprepared, inferior. That night, after a silent family dinner where his father again seemed distracted, Leo retrieved his ledger. Under Project Empirical Proof, he made a new entry. Phase 1. Psychological Stress Test. Complete. Method: Systemic Sabotage of Primary Reward Pathway. Scholarship Portfolio. Observation: Subject, MT, exhibited predicted failure mode, public emotional collapse, aggression, blame externalization. Confirms low resilience threshold. Conclusion: Hypothesis supported. System is aesthetically prioritized but structurally fragile. Integrity compromised under targeted pressure. He closed the book. In his mind, Marcus Thorne was no longer a person. He was a confirmed set of flawed parameters. A circuit that shorted out when tested. And in the living room downstairs, David Reed stared at the chessboard, not really seeing the pieces. He was thinking about the cold, perfect calm on his son's face at dinner. The absolute lack of anything resembling a teenage worry. He wrote it off, again, as focus, as brilliance. But the prick of cold was becoming a persistent chill. And he didn't know why. Chapter 4. The Ghost in the Machine. You know that feeling at a neighborhood barbecue? The smell of charcoal and burgers, the buzz of meaningless chatter, kids screaming as they run through sprinklers. It's supposed to feel safe. Normal. Like nothing bad could ever happen here. The Reed's backyard barbecue on June 12th was the picture of that perfect normal. David was manning the grill, debating the merits of mesquite with a neighbor. Evelyn floated between groups with a tray of lemonade, her lawyer's laugh ringing out. And Leo? Leo was the perfect host's son. He carried bags of ice. He helped a little girl find her lost flip-flop. He was polite, helpful, invisible. And he was watching one thing: the back door. Specifically, the hook by the back door, just inside the mudroom, where Marcus Thorne had hung his favorite baseball cap when he'd arrived earlier. A faded blue cap with a fish logo on it. Marcus wore it everywhere. It was soaked with his sweat from his daily runs. To Leo, it wasn't a cap. It was an access point. Earlier that afternoon, in the tomb silence of his bathroom, he'd performed the final preparation. He'd taken the tiny vial of sticky, clear paste, his CK isolate. Using a chemist's precision scale, he'd measured out a minuscule amount onto a glass slide. He'd added a few drops of pure alcohol, creating a fast-drying, nearly invisible solution. Then, using a fine-tipped artist's brush he'd taken from the school art room, he'd painted the solution onto the inner foam band of a spare baseball cap he'd bought. He'd let it dry, tested it. It left no visible stain, no smell. Just a dormant, crystalline film. Now, at the party, he waited for his moment. It came when his mother called everyone to the deck for a group photo. Leo, get in here. Everyone squeezed together. There was a chaotic, laughing shuffle as 20 people crowded onto the deck. It was the only time all afternoon when absolutely no one was looking at the house. Leo, standing at the edge of the group, took 3 silent steps backward, slipped inside the sliding glass door, and was alone in the cool, dim mudroom. His heart wasn't racing. His hands were steady. This was just the next logical step. He took the treated cap from his back pocket. In one smooth motion, he lifted Marcus's sweaty cap from its hook and replaced it with the duplicate. He pressed the inner band firmly between his fingers, ensuring contact. Then he hung Marcus's real cap back on the hook, directly over the top of the treated one, hiding it. 8 seconds. That was all it took. He slid the door open and rejoined the crowd just as the photographer said, "Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Everyone cheered. Leo smiled his perfect, polite smile in the picture. An hour later, as the sun began to dip, Marcus grabbed his cap off the hook. He didn't look at it. He just slapped it on his head, thanked the Reeds for the food, and headed out for his evening run around the community lake. The film of toxin, reactivated by the residual moisture in Marcus's own hat, began its work on contact with the warm skin of his forehead. A ghost entering the machine. Leo helped his parents clean up. He scraped plates, bundled trash, his actions rhythmic and calm. Inside, his mind was a quiet hum of anticipation. He was tracking time. Asterisk absorption. Rapid. Onset of symptoms. 20 to 40 minutes. Manifestation. Syncope episode. Apparent cause. Sudden cardiac event. Asterisk. He was upstairs in his room, pretending to read, when the first sirens cut through the twilight. Not one, but 2, then 3, their wails converging on the lake path. He didn't rush to the window. He waited. Then he stood, walked over, and peered through the blinds. Below, in the gathering blue dark, he saw the strobing red and blue lights painting the trees in frantic bursts. He saw the small crowd gathered. He saw the paramedics kneeling over a figure on the ground, working with a desperate, useless urgency. He watched for 5 full minutes. A spectator to his own experiment. Then he turned from the window, sat at his desk, and opened his ledger to a fresh page. He wrote the date and time. Then, under results, he wrote a single, clean line. Phase 2. Physical stress test. Conclusive. System failure achieved. No observable trace parameters detected. He closed the book. Downstairs, he heard the front door open. His father's voice, low and tense, talking to his mother. "It's Marcus Thorne. They found him on the running path. They think it was his heart." Leo listened to the shock, the grief in their voices. He felt nothing. No triumph. No fear. Just the satisfaction of a correct calculation. The ghost had done its work. And as far as the world was concerned, it was just a tragic, unexplainable accident. For Leo Reed, lying in his dark room later, listening to the last police cruiser drive away, it was something else. It was proof. He had interacted with the fundamental wiring of the world, of life and death itself, and had left no fingerprints. He was no longer just a brilliant kid. He was, he believed, an author of fate. And the story, so far, was written exactly as he had planned. Chapter 5. The First Crack. Grief in a place like Crestwood Bluffs is a quiet, respectable thing. Its casserole dishes left on doorsteps. Its lowered flags at the community center. It's a shared shaking of heads and phrases like, "Such a tragedy," and "You just never know." The Thorne house became a monument to shock. Flowers piled up on the porch. Inside, the world had collapsed. Outside, the neighborhood moved in a hushed, somber parade. And Leo Reed? He played his part flawlessly. At the funeral under a punishingly bright sun, he wore a dark suit that was just slightly too big, making him look younger, more fragile. He stood with his parents, his eyes downcast. When he approached Marcus's parents, he took Mrs. Thorne's hand and said, his voice cracking just right, "He was always so nice to everyone. I'm so sorry. It was a masterclass. He didn't overdo it. He was the picture of a good kid, grappling with a loss he couldn't understand." People patted his shoulder. "You're a good friend, Leo." He'd just nod, swallowing hard, as if fighting tears. David Reed watched his son. A part of him, the father's heart, ached with pride at Leo's compassion. But another part, the scientist in the back of his mind, remained detached, observant. It noted the precision of the performance, the perfect timing of the cracked voice. It was like watching a brilliant actor hit every mark. That detached part grew louder 2 days later. A colleague from the medical examiner's office, knowing David's expertise, called him in as a consultant. "The Thorne kid, David. The cardiac event. It's clean. Too clean. The markers are weird. Can you take a look? In the sterile, silent lab, David stared at the toxicology report on Marcus Thorne. His professional eye scanned the columns of numbers, the chemical signatures. Nothing screamed poison. But there was a pattern. A slight, almost ghostly skew in the metabolic panel. It was the absence of something expected, the presence of a faint, wrong shadow where there should have been nothing. It was like hearing a familiar song played in the wrong key. His mind, trained for decades, made a connection. It was tentative, a thread so fine it could be imagination. But it pointed toward a class of compounds. Natural. Fast metabolizing. The kind of thing a textbook might call theoretically ideal for leaving no trace. The kind of thing he'd mentioned at the dinner table. A cold knot tightened in his stomach.
No.
It's not possible. You're seeing patterns because you're tired. Because you knew the boy. He tried to shake it. He went home that night determined to be normal, to quiet the paranoid voice of the scientist. Evelyn made lasagna. The house was quiet, heavy with the unspoken weight of the week's tragedy. They ate in near silence, the only sound the clink of forks on plates. David finally spoke, just to fill the void. They asked me to consult on Marcus's case at the lab. The autopsy. It's inconclusive. Leo, who had been pushing food around his plate, looked up. His interest seemed academic. Inconclusive? What does that mean? It means they can't find a cause, David said, choosing his words carefully. Heart was structurally normal. No drugs. It's a medical mystery. Leo nodded slowly. Then he asked the question. His voice was calm, curious, the same tone he'd used to ask about a homework problem. Could it have been something from outside? Not ingested, but absorbed? Through the skin, maybe. Something that wouldn't show up on a normal screen. The room didn't freeze. The clock kept ticking. The refrigerator hummed. But for David Reed, the world screeched to a halt. The question was too specific. It mirrored the exact, professional track his own mind had been on in the lab. It used the correct term, absorbed. It wasn't a question a grieving friend asks. It was a question a researcher asks. David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He slowly looked across the table at his son. Leo met his gaze. There was nothing there. No guilt. No fear. Just a placid, intelligent curiosity. Waiting for an answer from the expert. In that stretched-out second of silence, the foundation of David Reed's world developed its first hairline crack. The father saw his brilliant, compassionate son. The toxicologist saw a cold, analytical mind probing the edges of a perfect crime. He managed to put his fork down. His appetite was gone. It's possible, David said, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. Theoretically. But highly unlikely. Right, Leo said, as if satisfied with the answer. Theoretically. He went back to his food. Evelyn, sensing the strange tension but misreading it completely, reached over and squeezed David's hand. It's so sad, she whispered. Let's not talk shop, okay? It's too grim. David just nodded, his eyes still locked on Leo, who was now calmly eating his lasagna as if they'd been discussing the weather. The crack was no longer just in the foundation. It was in David's heart, and it was silently, irrevocably, widening. Imagine having two voices in your head. One voice is a father's voice. It's warm. It's defensive. It says things like, he's your son. You've raised him. You've seen him cry at sad movies. He's just intellectually curious, that's all. You're being paranoid. You're letting the job poison your real life. The other voice is a toxicologist's voice. It's cold. It's logical. It deals in facts, patterns, and statistical probabilities. It whispers, the question was too precise. The metabolic shadow in the report matches the theoretical model. Curiosity doesn't look that calm. For David Reed, in the days after that dinner, those two voices became a war. And it was fought in silence. It started with small things. He'd watch Leo move through the house. The way he loaded the dishwasher with methodical, grid-like precision. The way he'd sit perfectly still while reading, not a fidget or a tap of a foot. It was a composure that felt less like peace and more like control. Absolute, total control. The father's voice said, "He's focused." The toxicologist's voice said, "He's contained." The war moved to David's own home office. One evening, after Leo had gone to bed, David stood in the doorway. The room felt different. It wasn't just his sanctuary anymore. It was a crime scene he was about to contaminate. His heart hammered against his ribs, not from the fear of finding something, but from the shame of looking. He moved like a ghost. He didn't turn on the main light, just used the dim glow from the hallway. He ran his fingers along the spines of his textbooks on the highest shelf. His prized forensic references. They were in order, but had the principles of plant toxinology been pulled forward slightly? Was there a faint layer of dust disturbed on its shelf? He opened the book. No notes fell out. No pages were dog-eared. But his eye caught on a single faint line in the margin near a section on cardiac glycosides. It wasn't a note. It was just a thin, straight pencil mark, as if someone had rested their finger there while reading. It could have been from years ago. It could have been from last week. He slammed the book shut, disgusted with himself. "You're seeing phantoms," the father's voice scolded. "You're hunting your own child." But the toxicologist's voice had a new piece of data. Interest has been shown. He couldn't ask Leo. To ask would be to accuse. To accuse without proof would destroy everything. So he did the only thing he could do. He went back to the evidence. The professional evidence. At the lab the next day, he made a call. He used his authority, his decades of respect, to make a simple, unofficial request. "Pull the Thorn boy's personal effects again," he told a technician. "The things from his house. Don't log it. Just run a broad-spectrum surface swab on anything that touched his skin. Look for organic residues. The weird stuff." He called it a hunch. He felt like a traitor. The results came back 48 hours later. The technician looked puzzled. "It's probably nothing, David. But on that baseball cap he wore? The sweatband. We got a trace hit. Minuscule. It's a plant-based compound, but it's weirdly isolated. Pure. Not like he brushed against a plant. Like it was applied." David's mouth went dry. What plant? The technician read off the chemical name. David didn't need to look it up. He knew it. Convalitoxin. The primary toxin in lily of the valley. The toxicologist's voice was now a scream in his mind, clear and terrible. Applied. Purified. Weaponized. The father's voice was desperate, scrambling. Coincidence. He could have touched it anywhere. The garden. Where? David's own voice was a rasp. Where would someone get a pure isolate of that? The technician shrugged. A professional lab. Or someone with serious skill, a home chemistry setup, and a hell of a lot of patience. Why? You think this is something? David couldn't answer. He just stared at the readout, the numbers blurring on the page. That afternoon, he drove to the Crestwood Bluffs Botanical Garden. He walked the paths, his feet carrying him on a dread-filled pilgrimage. He found the bed of lily of the valley near the koi pond. The delicate, bell-shaped white flowers nodded innocently in the breeze. He stood there, a respected scientist in a beautiful garden, and felt the world collapse inward. The two voices in his head fell silent. In their place was a single, devastating image. His son, Leo, standing right here. Clippers in hand. A plastic bag in his pocket. Collecting his ingredients. For the first time, the father and the toxicologist were in perfect, horrifying agreement. This was no longer a dilemma. It was a diagnosis. There's a special kind of dread that comes from knowing something, but not having the proof to make it real for anyone else. For David Reed, standing in the botanical garden, the knowledge was a cold, hard stone in his gut. The proof was all around him, nodding in the breeze. He looked at the lily of the valley. It was just a flower. Pretty. Common. But under his trained gaze, it transformed. It was a chemical factory. A dispensary of death. And his son had shopped here. He couldn't take a sample. He couldn't document anything. He was no longer just a scientist. He was the father of the prime suspect, contaminating the scene with every breath. So he did the only thing he could think to do that wouldn't be a direct, unforgivable act of betrayal. He made an anonymous call. From a payphone at a gas station 10 miles away, his voice lowered, he told the lead detective on the Marcus Thorne case 2 things. 1. To run a specific toxin panel if they hadn't already. 2. To check the security camera logs at the Crestwood Bluffs Botanical Garden for the month prior to the death, focusing on the area near the koi pond. He hung up feeling like a criminal. He'd just pointed the police toward his son. He drove home, his hands slick on the wheel, and waited for the world to fall apart. It took 2 days. The detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Valdez, didn't call David. She followed the lead. The toxin panel came back with that same weird trace. And the garden security footage, while grainy, showed a gold mine. There, on a Saturday afternoon weeks before Marcus died, was a clear shot of a figure in a dark blue windbreaker, a jacket David remembered buying for Leo last Christmas, lingering by the lily bed. The figure took out a small pair of clippers and a clear plastic bag from a backpack. The face was obscured by a baseball cap, but the height, the build, the way he moved, it was familiar. Detective Valdez brought the footage to the Reed home. She was polite, professional. She said they were following all leads, that it was probably nothing, but they had to ask. Did Leo own a jacket like that? Evelyn, baffled, went and got it from Leo's closet. She held it up. It was the exact same shade, the same brand. Half the kids in town have this jacket, she said, her voice defensive. Leo, summoned to the living room, looked at the paused video frame. He frowned, a perfect mimicry of confused concentration. That looks like my jacket, he said slowly. And I was at the garden for my biology project. I collected lots of leaf samples. For photosynthesis comparison. He looked at the detective, his eyes wide and earnest. Is that not allowed? Did I do something wrong? He sold the performance of a slightly worried, law-abiding student so well that even Detective Valdez softened. No, Leo, you're not in trouble. We're just being thorough. Do you remember what you collected? Leo rattled off a list of plants: oak, maple, pine. He never mentioned lily of the valley. It's all in my project notes, he said helpfully. I can show you. The detective declined. It was circumstantial. A kid in a common jacket, doing a school project, near some flowers. The trace on the cap was minuscule. It was a thread, but a thin one. You couldn't hang a case on it. But David saw the flicker in Leo's eyes when the detective turned to leave. Not relief. Contempt. He'd found their investigation clumsy. Predictable. And that's when Leo made his move. Arrogance demanded a counterattack. That evening, Leo remembered something. He came to his parents, his face a mask of troubled recollection. Mom, Dad, after the police were here, it got me thinking. Something Marcus said once. He was acting weird last fall. He said he thought someone was watching him. He even showed me this note he'd found in his locker. Evelyn perked up. A note? What did it say? Leo shrugged, feigning helplessness. I don't remember exactly. It was creepy. Just handwritten. He said he threw it away because it freaked him out. He let the idea hang in the air, the specter of a mysterious stalker, a random predator. A much simpler, more comforting villain than the boy next door. The next day, Detective Valdez got an anonymous tip to re-examine Marcus Thorne's school locker. And there, taped behind a loose panel that had somehow been missed in the initial search, was a crumpled piece of notebook paper. The handwriting was blocky, unnatural, like someone trying to disguise it. It read, I see the real you. It won't last. It was a masterstroke. A red herring wrapped in a mystery. The police focus subtly shifted. They started asking about grudges, about strangers, about anyone who might have envied Marcus. David sat in his kitchen that night, listening to Evelyn talk to a friend on the phone. The police think it might have been someone with a fixation, maybe some older person. It's just so awful. He looked at his son's closed bedroom door upstairs. Leo hadn't just defended himself. He'd redirected the entire narrative. He'd taken the thin thread of evidence pointing to him and skillfully, calmly, woven it into a tapestry of doubt pointing everywhere else. The stone of dread in David's gut grew heavier. The police were now looking for a phantom. And the real ghost, the one living under his roof, the one who could craft poison and plant evidence with the same calm precision, was watching them all from the shadows, believing himself more untouchable than ever. Let me tell you about the sound of certainty. It's not a bang. It's not a scream. Sometimes, it's the soft, rustling slide of paper. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, the police came back. They had the security footage, the trace on the hat, the weird note. It was all a messy, circumstantial pile. They needed to talk to Leo again. Officially. They did it at the school, in a sterile conference room. Leo sat, posture perfect. His lawyer, hired by Evelyn, sat beside him, a sleek, expensive wall of doubt. Detective Valdez laid it out. The garden. The jacket. The toxin. Leo listened, his face a mask of polite attentiveness. When she finished, he didn't flinch. He didn't stammer. He began to talk, and his words were like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and cool. The garden was for my project, he said, his voice even. You can verify the assignment with Ms. Rigby. The jacket, it's popular. The trace material. Detective, Lily of the Valley is everywhere. It's in our own backyard. It's in the Thorns' backyard. Couldn't Marcus have just brushed against it? Couldn't the trace have transferred at the barbecue, when our things were all piled together? He presented alternative explanations not with desperation, but with the calm logic of a debater. He acknowledged the note. It scared him. I told him to go to the principal. He didn't want to cause drama. That was Marcus. He painted a picture of Marcus as secretly troubled, a victim of unseen forces. He turned their suspicions inside out. The more they pushed, the more he sounded like the only reasonable person in the room. The interview ended not with a breakthrough, but with a frustrating sense of mist. He was there, in the middle of it all, and yet he seemed to just dissipate every accusation. When he came home, he was quiet, subdued. The perfect picture of a young man stressed by a terrible misunderstanding. Evelyn enveloped him in a hug. It's okay, sweetheart. They're just doing their job. It's all a horrible mistake. David stood in the doorway, watching. He saw the way Leo's eyes, over his mother's shoulder, met his. There was no fear in them. No gratitude for the comfort. There was a quiet, icy assessment. A challenge. That night, the dam broke. Evelyn, fueled by a mother's ferocious loyalty, finally turned on David in the kitchen. When are you going to stop this? She hissed, keeping her voice low so Leo wouldn't hear. They're hounding him. And you just watch. You with your professional skepticism. He's your son, David. I know he's my son. David shot back, his own control snapping. That's why I can see it, Evelyn. The questions he asks. The calmness. It's not right. Not right, she echoed, her voice trembling with rage. You think our son is a murderer? You'd rather believe that than believe the police are grasping at straws? What is wrong with you? Has your job made you this paranoid? This cold? They were in each other's faces, a lifetime of partnership crumbling into dust and fury. David, gesticulating, backed into the bookshelf in the den. A row of books rattled. You don't want to see the truth, he said, his voice ragged. The truth is he's innocent, she cried. In his anger, David swiped an arm across the shelf, knocking a handful of books to the floor. They landed with dull, heavy thuds. Silence descended, heavy and panting. The fight was gone, replaced by the wreckage of the moment. Evelyn stared at the mess on the floor, then at her husband, her eyes full of tears and betrayal. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone. David slumped, the anger draining out of him, leaving only a vast, hollow exhaustion. He knelt to pick up the books, his movements robotic. A biography. A book on wine. A thick volume on chess strategies. He went to slide the chess book back onto the shelf. It felt oddly light. The spine was stiff, but the pages seemed fused together. Frowning, he opened it. The center of the book had been hollowed out. A rectangular cavity, cut with neat, careful strokes. And inside that cavity was a simple, black composition notebook. David's blood turned to ice. The room seemed to tilt. He knew, even before he touched it. This was it. The sound of certainty. With trembling hands, he lifted the notebook out. He opened it to the first page. Project: Empirical Proof. Subject: MT. Hypothesis: Superior systemic stress induces catastrophic failure. He didn't need to read the details. He saw the dates. The clinical notes on Phase 1, Psychological Stress Test, the sabotaged portfolio. The cold observations of Marcus's distress. Then the later entries. The chemical formulas. The notation on CK isolate. And finally, the single, clean line after the night of the barbecue. Phase 2. Physical stress test. Conclusive. System failure achieved. It was all here. Not just the plan, but the mind behind it. The arrogant, chilling, scientific detachment. His son's handwriting. His son's genius. His son's soul, laid bare on cheap ruled paper. David sank to the floor, the ledger clutched in his hands. The war in his head was over. The father's voice was silent, slaughtered by the evidence. Only the toxicologist remained, staring at the incontrovertible data. The proof wasn't a ghost. It was a book. And it had just fallen, with a soft, final thud, into his lap. There are choices that split your life into a before and an after. Not the big, dramatic ones you see in movies, but quiet, terrible ones made in the dead of night. David Reed sat at his kitchen table, the black ledger open in front of him. The house was silent. Evelyn was upstairs, asleep in the guest room, a continent of hurt between them. The only light was the cool blue glow from the range hood. He had read every page. Twice. The clinical dissection of a human being. The pride in the craftsmanship of poison. The final, conclusive note. It was a confession, written not in tears, but in data. The father in him was gone. That part had died on the den floor. What remained was a man standing at a cliff's edge, holding the only truth that mattered. He could burn it. He could take this evil little book, hold it over the gas burner, and watch it curl into ash. He could choose his son. He could live with the ghost of Marcus Thorne, and the living ghost of the monster he'd raised. He could preserve the shattered pieces of his family. He looked at his hands. The hands that had held his son as a baby. The hands that now held the proof of his son's cruelty. He thought of Marcus Thorne's parents. Their hollow, broken eyes. He thought of truth, not as a concept, but as a weight. A debt. Before the sun could rise and give him time to change his mind, he drove to the district attorney's office. He didn't call. He just sat in the empty parking lot, the ledger on the passenger seat, until the first lights flickered on. His meeting with the DA, Carla Mendez, was short and brutally quiet. He placed the ledger on her desk without a word. She opened it, her eyes scanning. Her professional mask didn't slip, but he saw the blood drain from her knuckles as she gripped the page. "David," she finally said, her voice soft with a horror that wasn't just professional. "I know," he said. His own voice sounded like it came from another room. "Do what you have to do." The arrest happened at dawn, as they often do. The time when people are softest, most vulnerable, still clinging to dreams. David and Evelyn stood together on the front porch, not touching, united only in shock. The police cars were in the driveway, their lights painting the manicured lawn in silent, swirling red and blue. It felt like a violation of the very air. Leo came out calmly, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, as if for a casual early outing. Detective Valdez read him his rights in a flat, formal tone. The words "murder in the first degree" hung in the cool morning air. Evelyn made a sound, a raw, animal whimper, and lunged forward, but an officer gently held her back. "Leo. Baby, it's a mistake. Don't say anything. We'll get a lawyer." Leo didn't look at her. He didn't struggle as they guided his hands behind his back to apply the handcuffs. The metal click was obscenely loud. He turned his head. He looked past his weeping mother, past the stone-faced officers. His eyes found his father's. And then Leo Reed smiled. It wasn't a smile of defiance. It wasn't a sneer of hatred. It was a small, disappointed, almost pitying smile. The smile of a master whose star pupil has just failed a simple test. It said, clearer than any words, "You of all people. I thought you were smarter than this. I thought you understood." In that smile, David saw the final, awful truth. Leo wasn't sorry for killing Marcus. He was disappointed in his father for choosing justice over blood, for being moral over being brilliant, for being weak. Then they put a hand on Leo's head and guided him into the back of the squad car. The door slammed shut with a final, metallic thud that echoed through the quiet cul-de-sac. The cars pulled away, lights still spinning but silent now. The spectacle was over. Evelyn sank to her knees on the porch, sobbing into her hands. David remained standing, watching the empty space where the car had been. He could still see the ghost of that smile hanging in the air. It wasn't the arrest that had broken the last thread between them. It was that smile. A smile that told him, as the sun finally rose over Crestwood Bluffs, that his son had been lost to him long, long before the police ever arrived. After an arrest, there's a strange, suspended silence. The sirens are gone. The shouting is over. What's left is the quiet, meticulous machinery of justice grinding to life. And for the people caught in the gears, every click and turn is agony. Two legal teams now entered the fray, armed with the same facts but seeing two completely different worlds. In the district attorney's office, Carla Mendez built a case like a forensic scientist, which, in a way, she was. Her star witness was David Reed. Her evidence was the ledger. Her narrative was one of cold, premeditated intellect. "This isn't a crime of passion," she told her team, tapping the photocopied pages of Leo's notes. "This is a thesis. The victim was an experiment. We need the jury to see that. We need them to understand the arrogance of that." Her strategy was to follow the poison. From the garden, to the home lab, to the hat, to the body. She would use David to explain not just the how, but the terrifying why. A mind so convinced of its own superiority that it saw murder as a logical proof. Across town, in a sleek high-rise law firm paid for by Evelyn's savings and her shattered faith, the defense team crafted a counterstory. Their leader, a charismatic attorney named Julian Thorne, no relation to the victim, a fact he called an unfortunate irony, saw the case differently. "The prosecution has a book and a broken father," he told Evelyn, his voice calm, reassuring. "The book is disturbing, yes. But it's just dark fiction. The mind of a gifted, pressured teen exploring morbid thoughts. The father—" He paused, giving a sympathetic sigh. "A man consumed by a profession that sees poison everywhere. A man who may have felt threatened by his own son's intellect." Their strategy was to attack the source. They would paint David as a cold, disconnected workaholic who'd neglected his son. They would suggest that David's guilt over that neglect had metastasized into a bizarre fantasy, that he'd planted the ledger to frame his own son, to prove himself right, to gain professional notoriety for solving the crime. They would turn the family's perfect image inside out, revealing what they called the cracks beneath the Crestwood varnish. Evelyn clung to this theory. It was the only life raft in her shipwrecked world. To believe otherwise was unthinkable. And Leo? He sat in the county jail, in a cell block far from general population for his own safety. He didn't slump. He didn't despair. He read law books. Psychology texts. He was preparing, too. During a visitation with his mother and Julian Thorne, he was eerily composed. "The prosecution's case is entirely circumstantial," he said, his tone like a tutor's. "The garden proves nothing. The ledger is unverifiable. My father's testimony is biased and scientifically speculative." He looked at his lawyer. "You need to highlight the lack of direct evidence. No witness saw me do it. No camera caught the act. It's all theory." He believed, with every fiber of his being, that he could outthink the room, that logic would prevail over emotion. He saw the trial as the final, ultimate test of his system, and he was confident he'd already written the correct answer. He didn't ask about his father. Meanwhile, David endured his own preparation. It was a kind of slow-motion torture. In a stark conference room, Carla Mendez prepped him for the stand. "They will come after you," she said, her eyes steady. "They will say you're a failed father. They will imply you planted the evidence. They will try to make you angry, to make you seem vengeful. You cannot take the bait." David nodded. He practiced answering harsh, personal questions without flinching. "Dr. Reed, were you jealous of your son's mind?" "No." "Is it true you've prioritized your career over your family for years?" "My career is how I provide for my family." "Did you, in fact, create this so-called ledger yourself to cover for your own professional failure to find the killer?" He took a breath. "No. I found it. It is in my son's handwriting." The words tasted like ash. Every session was a rehearsal for the public destruction of his own life, his own family, by his own hand. The stage was set. The prosecution had a story of a monstrous intellect. The defense had a story of a monstrous father. And Leo, in his cell, believed he had a story of a monstrous misunderstanding. All that was left was for the courtroom doors to open, for the jury to be seated, and for these three competing versions of the truth to collide. Only one would survive. And no matter which one did, the Reed family was already gone. The courtroom doesn't feel real when you're in it. It feels like a stage set. The wood is too polished. The silence is too heavy. And everyone is playing a role. David Reed walked to the witness stand like a man walking to the gallows. The squeak of his shoes on the floor was the only sound. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the jury's curious stares, Evelyn's burning gaze from the defense table, the blank, bored look of his own son. He swore to tell the truth, his voice a dry rustle in the quiet. Carla Mendez began gently. She had him establish who he was. A forensic toxicologist with 22 years of experience. A father. She had him describe the dinner conversation about ghosts in the machine. She led him, step by careful step, through his growing suspicion. The odd metabolic panel. The trace on the hat. The security footage. Then, she placed the ledger in his hands. "Can you identify this, Dr. Reed?" "Yes. This is a notebook I found hidden in my son's bedroom." "And can you read the first line for the court, please?" David's throat tightened. He looked down at the page, at his son's neat, familiar handwriting. The words seemed to vibrate on the paper. Project, empirical proof. He read it aloud. His voice didn't shake, but it was hollow, like something empty being struck. For the next hour, he was not a father on the stand. He was an expert witness explaining the autopsy of a personality. He walked the jury through the ledger's pages. Here was the hypothesis, Marcus as a system. Here were the notes on psychological sabotage, the Phase 1 stress test. Here were the chemical formulas, the notes on extraction, the chilling conclusion, system failure achieved. He explained, in simple terms, how the science in the ledger matched the ghostly trace in Marcus's body. He connected the dots from the garden to the vial to the hat. He was clear. He was clinical. He was devastating. When Carla Mendez finally said, "Your witness," and sat down, you could feel the air in the room change. It went from the cool, sterile atmosphere of a lecture to the charged, waiting silence before a storm. Julian Thorne, the defense attorney, stood up. He didn't approach the stand angrily. He moved like a panther, smooth, confident, knowing he has the prey cornered. He started with respect. Dr. Reed, an impressive career. You've testified as an expert. How many times? Over 100. Yes. You're used to being the smartest person in the room on this subject, aren't you? I'm used to explaining complex science to juries. Of course. And in your home, were you used to being the smartest person in the room? David paused. Objection, Carla said, but the judge let it stand. The trap was being set. I don't think of my family in those terms, David said. But your son, Leo, his intellect is remarkable, isn't it? Surpassed yours by the time he was 15, some might say. He is very bright. Bright enough to understand your work. To ask those insightful, theoretical questions. Thorne let that hang. Doctor, would you say you felt a professional rivalry with your own son? No, the word was sharp. Did you perhaps feel threatened by him? This new, brilliant mind growing up in your shadow, destined to outshine you. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. But the seed was planted. Thorne shifted gears. He began to paint a picture not of a family, but of a lab. A cold, emotionally distant home where dinner conversation was about poisons, where approval was tied to intellectual achievement. He implied, without ever saying it directly, that David was a ghost in his own home, present, but not truly there. Then he went for the heart. Dr. Reed, the night you found this ledger, you'd had a violent argument with your wife, correct? We had a disagreement. A shouting match. And in your anger, you struck a bookshelf, causing books to fall. Yes. And this ledger, it just happened to fall out then? This key piece of evidence that only you had access to? How very convenient. David felt a cold sweat on his back. That's what happened. Is it possible, Doctor, that your guilt over your emotional distance from your son, and your professional failure to find answers in the Marcus Thorne case, drove you to create a narrative? To plant this disturbing, but ultimately fictional, document to give yourself an answer? To make yourself, once again, the expert who solved the puzzle? The accusation hung in the air, ugly and plausible. No, David said, his voice firmer now. That is not possible. The ledger is my son's. The evidence is real. But the damage was done. To the jury, David was no longer just a scientist. He was a complicated, possibly jealous, certainly troubled man. The foundation of his testimony had been injected with poison. As David stepped down from the stand, his legs unsteady, he passed the defense table. He couldn't help but look at Leo. And Leo looked back. There was no anger, no fear. Just a faint, almost imperceptible smirk in his eyes. The look of a player who believes his opponent has just made a fatal mistake. In Leo's mind, the equation was tilting in his favor. His father's credibility was cracked. The defense's story was taking hold. The brilliant boy was winning. He didn't know that the worst blow was not the attack on his father's character. The worst blow was still to come. And it would come from his own mouth. There is a specific kind of quiet in a courtroom right before a verdict. It's a thick, heavy quiet, full of held breath and pounding hearts. But this was different. This was the quiet before the quiet. The moment right after the last piece of evidence is laid bare, and all that's left is for the jury to decide what it means. The air was stifling. The prosecution had rested. The defense had rested. The closing arguments were done. All the words had been spoken. The only thing left was David Reed, back on the stand for one final question. A redirect from Carla Mendez, to try and mend the tears the defense had ripped in his character. She approached the stand, her heels clicking in the silence. She didn't have a notepad. She just looked at him, and then at the jury. Dr. Reed, just one more time. After everything you've heard, your expertise, your knowledge of your home, your knowledge of your son, after all the theories and accusations from the defense, do you have any doubt? Any doubt at all that Leo Reed planned and carried out the murder of Marcus Thorne? It was the simplest question in the world. It required a yes or a no. David felt the eyes of the room on him. He saw Evelyn, her face pale and rigid. He saw the jury, waiting. He saw Leo at the defense table, looking at him with an expression of pure, icy boredom, as if this entire proceeding was a tedious formality he had to endure. David turned his head and looked directly at his son. He looked into the eyes of the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, the young man he'd been so proud of. He searched for a flicker of the child, for a ghost of remorse, for anything. He saw only a polished, empty surface. A mirror reflecting back nothing at all. He turned back to the prosecutor. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the still room. "No," he said. "No doubt whatsoever. 2 words. Clean. Final." And that's when it happened. From the defense table came a sound. It started as a small, choked snort. Then it bubbled up, uncontrollable, into a full, genuine, rich laugh. It wasn't loud. But in that tomb-like silence, it was a thunderclap. Leo Reed was laughing. His shoulders shook. He put a hand over his mouth, as if trying to be polite, but the laughter kept escaping, sharp and bright and utterly, horrifyingly real. He was laughing at the sheer, ridiculous absurdity of it all. Of his father's solemn certainty. Of the jury's grave faces. Of the whole pathetic pantomime of justice when he, Leo, understood the deeper, simpler truth, that he was smarter than all of them, and they were just too blind to see it. The gasp that went through the courtroom was a living thing. The judge's eyes bulged. One juror actually recoiled, as if physically struck. Evelyn made a small, wet sound of utter horror, her hand flying to her mouth. But David just watched. He didn't react. Because in that laugh, he finally heard the truth he'd been searching for. It wasn't in the ledger. It wasn't in the science. It was in this unfiltered, contemptuous sound. That laugh was Leo's soul, unmasked. It was the sound of his arrogance finally breaking through the polished surface, the real boy peering out from behind the monster's brilliant facade. It was the sound of someone who believed, to his core, that he was above it all. That this, a murder trial, was a joke. Order. The judge's gavel cracked down, once, twice. The defendant will control himself. The bailiffs shifted, tense. Leo brought his laughter under control, wiping a tear from the corner of his eye, a wide, incredulous smile still plastered on his face. He shook his head, as if to say, "Can you believe this?" But the damage was cosmic. In that instant, the defense's careful story, the pressured genius, the misunderstood boy, the overbearing father, evaporated. No troubled teen laughs like that. No one falsely accused finds that moment funny. That laugh was a confession more powerful than any words. David slowly stepped down from the witness stand. As he passed the defense table on his way back to his seat, he didn't look at Leo. He didn't need to. The laugh had said everything. It was the echo of the monster's voice, finally clear for everyone to hear. And in its wake, it left only one possible verdict. The trial wasn't over. But everyone in that room, in their gut, already knew how it would end. The gavel had sounded. But the echo of the laugh was what would linger, long after they all went home. They say a jury's speed tells you everything. A quick verdict means the evidence was clear. A long deliberation means doubt. The jury in the case of the People versus Leo Reed was out for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were the first clue. They didn't look at the defense table. Not a single one of them glanced at Leo. It's a thing they tell you not to read into, but everyone does. It's a reflex. When you've decided someone is guilty of something monstrous, it's hard to look at them. The judge asked for the verdict. The foreman, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stood. On the count of murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant? We find the defendant, Leo Reed, guilty. The word hit the room like a physical object. There was a collective gasp, then a muffled cry from Evelyn. But the sound that followed drowned it out. Leo didn't scream. At first, he just said, "No," a flat, disbelieving statement. Then he said it again, louder. "No." He stood up, his chair scraping violently behind him. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, but Leo shook him off like he was a gnat. His cold, calculated facade didn't just crack, it exploded. His face, always so perfectly composed, twisted into a rictus of pure, infantile rage. "You're wrong. You're all stupid. You didn't understand. You didn't listen." He was shouting at the jury, his voice breaking, spittle flying. The calm genius was gone. In his place was a furious little boy who'd just been told the rules of the game applied to him, too. Two bailiffs moved toward him. He turned his wild eyes on his father, who sat rigid in the front row of the gallery. And Leo screamed at him, a raw, tearing sound that held all the contempt in the world. "I am you." The words echoed in the sudden, stunned silence. It was the only defense he had left. An accusation. A belief that his father's intellect, his coldness, his analytical nature, had been the blueprint for all of this. That David had made him this way, and was now a hypocrite for condemning it. The bailiffs reached him, gripping his arms. As they pulled him away, still struggling, his final scream was wordless, just a howl of thwarted superiority. The door to the holding cell slammed shut behind him, cutting off the sound. The formal sentencing came weeks later. Life without the possibility of parole. The judge called it a chilling act of inhuman calculation. Evelyn Reed did not attend. David did. He sat alone, listening to the legal language that sealed his son's fate. He felt nothing. He was a vessel emptied out. The fallout was quiet and total. Evelyn filed for divorce within a month. There were no screaming matches. Just a lawyer's letter. The note she left on the kitchen counter said simply, "You chose your truth over your son. I can never forgive that." She sold her share of the house, took what was left of her savings, and moved to another state. She never spoke to David again. Crestwood Bluffs, the perfect community, did what it does best. It pretended the blemish never existed. The for sale sign went up in the Reed's yard, but it sat there for a long, long time. People didn't want to live in that house. David stopped going to the grocery store in town. The weight of the stairs, the hushed conversations that died when he approached, was too heavy. He lived alone in the echoing house as it slowly sold around him. One evening, he found himself in the den. He opened a drawer in the desk, one he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a family photo from a hiking trip. Leo was 12, grinning with a missing tooth, squinting in the sun. David was behind him, hands on his shoulders. Evelyn was laughing. He looked at the face of the boy in the photo. He searched for a sign, a shadow of what was to come. He found none. There was just a boy. His boy. He didn't cry. The well was too deep for that. He simply closed the drawer, the soft thud final in the empty house. Justice had been served. The brilliant, arrogant monster had been unmasked and caged. The ghost had been given a name. But as David Reed turned off the lights and walked through the two quiet rooms, he understood the terrible math of it all. Some truths don't set you free. They just become the empty space you live in. The verdict had given the world closure. For him, it had only made the silence louder. This was a story about the darkest choices a family can face. If this narrative gripped you, if it made you question what you might do in that impossible situation, then you understand the power of the psychological thriller. For more deep dives into the minds that live in the shadows, make sure you're subscribed. Your engagement is what allows me to keep bringing you these stories. Thank you for watching.